Hi, this is Dan Parsley, President of AngelMD. You're about to hear the investment overview from the CEO of Neumentum, a very promising non-opioid pain pharmaceutical company. This investment opportunity is part of a $5 million Series A1 round, which is reserved for institutional investors. Ordinarily, we would have a guaranteed carve-out for AngelMD prior to opening an investment syndicate. In this case, however, we do not have such a guarantee, but we do have the commitment and the verbal assurance from senior management and board members to accommodate an AngelMD investment. Should this accommodation not materialize, we will refund your investment in full. Thank you for your investment in Neumentum and your interest in AngelMD. Have a great day.
Welcome, everybody. This is a Neumentum review call. We have the CEO, Scott Shibley, on the call, as well as several representatives from AngelMD who are interested in being syndicate leaders on this call, who will be engaging with Scott and his team so that we better understand the product offering of Neumentum and the investment opportunity. It is our intent to make a final decision to go forward with a syndicate to raise up to a $500,000 carve-out. We've got a short timeline on this of getting a commitment by June 8th, hence the kind of the acceleration of this. I want to thank Dr. Duffy for bringing this opportunity to our attention, and I wanted to ask if we can. The goal of this call is to give Scott an opportunity to give us a brief overview of the company, the product, the major milestones, use of the funds of this round, and in what, in your mind, Scott, are the kind of the most compelling investment themes, and give us your outlook, if you would, on your best guess on the outcome, the exit outlook for the company, valuation range, if you would, and then Dexter, if you could review the details of the note, the security that we would be investing in, and then I'll be happy to then we'll open it up to Q&A, and then I'll be happy to wrap it up at the conclusion. So with that, Scott, if I could turn it over to you.
Sure, yeah. Go ahead, Dexter.
Well, great. And this is Dexter Pearson. I'm with Brookline Capital Markets. We are the company's investment bankers based in New York. We are currently raising a $10 million Series A prime round that is at a $23 million pre-money valuation. It's in a convertible preferred, and we recently closed on $5 million of the 10 on this past Monday. So with that, I'll turn it over to Scott. We're looking for our second $5 million in this, and would love to include the AngelMD group.
Yeah, exactly. And so, hi everybody. This is Scott, and I know I've spoken to a couple of you already, or corresponded, and it's that I'm going to keep comments pretty brief. I understand about 15 minutes is what we're looking for here, and we're certainly open to opening up for whatever questions you have. We think we have a really compelling and exciting opportunity with the company, with Neumentum, and we've had, it's been really successful for us to date, much rapidly than we even envisioned. Before I introduce myself, I want to also point out, I think Dr. Joe Pergolesi is on the phone as well, who is co-founder of mine. He's our executive chairman. And Joe, are you there? Do you want to say hello quickly?
Yes, I am.
Yeah,
hi, everybody. Real pleasure to be on the line. Real excited about the opportunity to collaborate. I'm an anesthesiologist by training. Before that, I was a physical chemist, and I've been doing drug development globally for the last 25 years, both drugs, devices, natural products, OTCs, etc. I've worked with Scott about 17 or 18 of those years, and globally, between Scott and I, looking at both devices and drugs, we probably have been involved about $15 billion globally for different type of analgesic regimens, whether they're a drug or a device, etc. So it's a real pleasure to be in front of my peers. I think you'll see that this is a very de-risked, capital efficient opportunity to address a real problem that we have. And I hope we're able to explain it to you in a manner that you can agree with us that it's a benefit for all the stakeholders.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Joe. Thanks. So, Joe's background is very extensive. He's truly one of the world-renowned KOLs in pain management. Is recognized as such, and is published many times in front of the FDA very often in a consulting way. So, he's been a great partner and great co-founder to have on board here. And he basically, we came together on this only a little over a year ago. I'll take you through a little bit of that. But, real quickly, my background as the CEO, I'm 30 years plus in the pharma industry. I've worked for companies like Sanofi and more recently Pfizer, where I ran the global pain business. So I was in charge of products like Lyrica and Celebrex and their pipeline products. I've also been involved in had senior leadership roles in 3 or 4 specialty pharma companies, such as Endo, Alpharma, and most recently a company called Depomed, which are specialty companies that at the time were focusing in pain. So I've been in pain, I guess you could say, somewhat chronically for almost 20 years now, and that's my area as well. And done a lot of establishment of new businesses, new companies, a lot of M&As and BD. So together, Joe and I think we make a pretty darn good team, and we love working together. So the value proposition, short and sweet here, is that Neumentum is a non-opioid pain company, and our whole vision is to develop and commercialize novel pain medicines that are not opioids. And when we first formed the company back in March a year ago, we knew that would be an interesting business proposition given all the stuff going on with opioids. We actually never thought it would be quite as attractive a business offering as it's turned out to be, and hence the reason for accelerating this A-prime raise right now. Because as you all know very well, because I believe most of all of you are clinicians, this opioid crisis has really reached a fever pitch, not just in terms of the crisis itself, but the media attention to it, the political attention to it, the pressure on FDA to do something about it, and so on and so on. And so, our company, the timing, timing is everything. Timing, in part, is a big piece of this because we've been very well received by investors as well as various providers and other people, and including the FDA. And I'll come back to that in a second. We have 5 products in our portfolio. They're all non-opioid pain medicines. They're all novel in the approach. The lead product that's driving a lot of the valuation and a lot of the story right now behind us is a novel formulation of Ketorolac, which will be used for post-surgical pain. So it's a injectable product for use immediately post-surgery for all the major surgeries. And what's novel about this, among other things, is that it is a pre-mixed bag. It's a very simple 100 ml pre-mixed bag, which can be hung right away in the PAC-U following surgery. And it enables 24 hours of continuous infusion of Ketorolac, which, as you folks may know, is the most potent of the NSAIDs, and it's actually been shown to be as potent as morphine. And as such, it can provide just the one bag, 24 hours of coverage and of pain relief for a patient, following many of the big surgeries, whether they're orthopedic surgeries, abdominal surgeries, whatever they might be. The product is phase 3 ready. It's got excellent IP around it. We have 2 issued patents, a composition of matter patent as well as a method of treatment patent. We actually have patent protection on this. And part of that is because of the novelty of the formulation. Part of that is that it's alcohol-free. So we have that covered in our patents, but we have patent protection through 2036. So a really nice sort of tail end on this. And incredibly positive marketing research that indicates a high level of interest on the part of hospitals pharmacists and anesthesiologists in particular in the product. So we're ready to go into phase 3 following a PK study we're going to be doing here in the next couple of months. And we just passed, and the timing of this call is actually perfect because we just passed a major milestone. Last week we were in front of FDA where we had proposed our program to them in a Type C meeting setting. And we had a very, very positive discussion with them. They were very supportive. Clearly, they are under, some political pressure, if you will, to, not erect huge barriers to non-opioid pain solutions. And that came through loud and clear to us. We may end up getting a priority review and a fast track on this. And long story short, we came out of that meeting last week having, I would say, highly de-risked any risks that were remaining in the program. And we're ready to rock and roll and move ahead on the program going forward. I should say this is a 505(b)(2) with this product, which, as you know, can be a streamlined and cost-efficient development program. So that was reiterated again with FDA. We just need to do one pivotal study, and that will be a phase 3 study, efficacy study done in bunionectomy. There's going to be a study done in parallel, an open-label study to help bolster the safety database. So we'll be able to have data on up to 900 patients as we combine and pull the data together. And so in terms of use of funds, in terms of this raise and the follow-up crossover raise that will happen later this year, it'll be largely to support this product and largely to support those 2 phase 3 studies, complete the PK study that we're initiating, and also conduct a health economic study on the back end of this later in 2019. We expect to have readout on the pivotal study, the bunionectomy trial, in third quarter of next year, which will be another key milestone for us because having proof of efficacy versus placebo, which in moderate severe post-surgical pain, this product is highly likely that it will be differentiated from placebo. That'll be a key milestone for us, at which time the plan is to look very seriously at doing an IPO. So again, that's third quarter of 2019 for that. And those funds will be used to commercialize the product, which we will do in 2020 when we expect approval and launch. But I will say, at the same time frame, there's also a certain likelihood of an exit on this, and we know that because we've already had some fairly significant interest on the part of strategics. So pretty big companies with hospital sales forces have already approached us. So there's that possibility too. So that you all are well aware of what that could be. We will go into the PK study first, and that's a protocol that FDA likes very much. And we submitted some very compelling data to support that, which really shows the difference of a continuously infused Ketorolac in terms of plasma levels and effectiveness versus the available bolus injection of Ketorolac, which is out there available generically. Very persuasive data. So we will replicate that in our own PK study over the next couple of months. We'll have that data available, at least top line, in August. So the timeline of the whole thing is, I'm sure there are going to be some questions on this, but basically we start off the PK study ASAP, and we're just waiting on clinical supply and to finish the IND submission right now. Study will start in late June, and then, as I said, top-line data in August. We will then meet with FDA again to review and discuss that data with them, at which time we'll finalize all the I guess, niggly details around the remaining studies and start them early next year. And so then you'll get into, as I said, the timeline I talked about before with phase 3 later in 2019 and then approval in 2020 with a possibility of a priority review and a fast track on that as well. Highly likely, I would say. In terms of business development, I just want to note for you all that we do have, as I said, we have 5 products that we have global rights to already in our portfolio. But we are, just to mention, we're late stage in negotiations with a big pharma company for another non-opioid pain asset that is kind of a phase 1, phase 2 timeframe project. That is an orally active, non-opioid. It would have a broad indication for acute pain. And so that's an office space, so not necessarily in the hospital. So oral formulation. It's also parenterally active too, so that has a possibility as well. And we would hope to wrap up those negotiations the next couple of months. So just that's kind of an FYI, just to know that's in the works. And it's not built into the valuation at present. It's an upside for us, but we feel pretty good about that one as well. So that is basically, that's a quick run through. It's basically the high level on it. We have a terrific team that we've put together, and this is all in the background deck, in the corporate deck. But in addition to Joe and myself, we've got some really super senior executives. Dr. Steigerwald, Alana Steigerwald, is our chief medical officer and head of clinical development. We recruited her from Grunenthal, the German pain company. They're the number one pain company in Europe, have been for a number of years. She was with them for 20 years and has developed many novel pain medications, gotten them through FDA. We have a guy named Robert Rafa, who's our chief scientific officer. He is also very well-known AOL in the space. He used to run Johnson & Johnson's pain development group for a number of years, and so for us, he acts as CSO, and think of him as in charge of early stage projects. Ilana is leading the later stage stuff. And then there's a woman named Christine McHale, who is our what we call a chief business officer, but think of her as a CFO and corporate development person. She's also an attorney, but she's very experienced at doing IPOs, very successful IPOs, major transactions, sales of companies and products. So she brings that to the table for us. And as I said, she's an attorney as well. So, we've got a great team. I could go on and on this one because we love the team we have. And at the moment, we're virtual. It's just worked out very well that way. So it's very low overhead. We spend 85 to 90% of our spend, our burn, is on the program. It's not on infrastructure. It's a really low G&A burn, and I expect to continue that for a while at least. So very efficient on that part. And the final piece is just the interest in the company has been tremendous. We closed working with Dexter and the Brookline Capital guys. We closed on our Series A back in November. We took in $6 million, and we had to cut back people at that point. We were oversubscribed. That's another reason why we wanted to accelerate the A prime, because we had a lot of interest for folks, and we're looking to wrap that one up sometime second week of June is what we're targeting right now for that. So that's the high level on it, and it's been terrific. It's been great to work on, and we're elated at the outcome of the FDA meeting last week. That was a huge thing for us. So again, as I said, good time for us to be talking with you all. And with that, I'll stop and take a breath. And any questions you have, Joe and I we're happy to answer.
Great, Scott. Thank you so much. Let me just open it up to our syndicate leader prospects who would have some Q&A. And I would just ask everyone to do your best to mute if you're not currently speaking. Thank you.
This is Gus Haddad. Thank you so much. Very nice presentation, and congratulations on bringing the company this far. I do have a few questions. I'm a physician. By training, I don't practice much anymore, but I used to use a lot of Toradol back in the day when I used to do procedures. How many milligrams are you putting in that 100 milliliter bag?
Yeah, great question. And I should mention something that I forgot to before, but we actually, the fact that you called it Toradol reminded me, but we actually have registered the trademark Toradol also, which those of you who know the drug, you'll know that nobody around the hospital calls it Ketorolac. They call it Toradol. That's the old Roche trademark. And basically, we were able to secure the rights to that, and we registered it. So just in terms of recognition, brand recognition, and so forth, that's a big deal for us as well. We plan to answer your question, and the PK simulations and analysis we've done have shown that 96.5 mgs in the 100 mLs is what we're targeting for this. And it basically would be out of the same bag, one pre-mixed bag. You can first initiate a small bolus of about 12.5 mgs to get the patient up very quickly to the right plasma level, and then you run it at 3.5 mgs per hour over the 24 hours. So that'll take you to your 96.5. And what's also good about that is that, in addition to that, we have our expectation that'll get you at a good pain relief threshold, is that that's well under the 120 mgs per day limitation that FDA has put in Ketorolac's label. And they've done that obviously for safety reasons. They've always had questions about Ketorolac from a GI safety perspective, and that's why that restriction is on Ketorolac, on the existing generic Ketorolac injection. And in fact, what our data has showed that we've done chart studies and also gotten other data which shows that Ketorolac in the bolus form now is dosed often 4, 5, 6, or more times a day. So, unfortunately, a lot of patients are getting an amount of Ketorolac that's well beyond the 120 mg threshold. So we think, that's at 30 mgs per dose, right? So pretty quickly, if you're getting 4 or 5 doses, you can see that you're pushing the safety threshold here. So that's been viewed very favorably by anesthesiologists and providers we talk to, as well as FDA in our discussions with them.
Thank you. I do have a few more questions if you guys are okay with me kind of getting them over with, or do you want to give someone else a chance?
Continue on, Russ. Go.
Yeah, whatever you like to do is fine. Yep.
Sure, thank you. Now there was a lot of mention in what I read and what you're saying about the opioid addiction epidemic, etc. My understanding is the opioid problem in the country is not from the 24-hour post-surgical infusion. It's more from the pain management prescriptions or the oral prescriptions patients go home with. How do you see that changing from a morphine drip or fentanyl or whatever, or Demerol to a 24-hour NSAID infusion? How does that have any impact on the perception of decrease in opioid addiction in the country?
Well, let me just give a quick answer, and I'll invite Joe to comment on this too, because he's very close to this topic. So a couple things on that. The first thing is, over and above the opioid epidemic itself and how it's playing out, hospitals are under severe pressure to cut down on opioids, and they're concerned about diversion, they're concerned about administrative burdens, liabilities, the cost of handling side effects, all those other aspects which come with the in-hospital use of opioids. So they're looking very aggressively for other solutions as well. And then, just as as an intro to what Joe might add, what we know from data is that there's data out there that suggests that there is a fairly strong connection between eventual abuse and maybe addiction to patients who are started initially in the post-surgical setting on opioids. And part of that is connected to the outpatient script. To get back to exactly the point you're making, the outpatient script that a patient receives, if they get an opioid intravenously for the first 24, 48 hours, whatever, quite often they're exiting the prescription for Percocet or Vicodin or whatever it is, and that leads to the epidemic because they're oftentimes coming out with a prescription for 30 or something, and they end up using 5 or 6 or whatever it is, and the longer that goes. So it does tend to start in the hospital, and we may even end up measuring outpatient scripts that are dispensed as the patient leaves and seeing if we separate from patients who get opioids and see if that's reduced as well as part of our health economic study. But let me ask Joe to comment on that, because it's a really important question.
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, it becomes such a blur when you look at the reporting out there, because first you have to differentiate between, illicit opioids or opiates and, pharmaceutical dispensed or prescribed opiates. And really since 2012, there's been a sort of drop-off in the pharmaceutical contributions from what would be, quote, legitimate prescriptions that get diverted. And there's been a tremendous increase in heroin and illicitly manufactured fentanyls, et cetera. So once you sort of cut through all that and then you start to look at root cause error or root systematic problems, people are tracing it back to exposure in the hospitals. And when we look at the hospital exposure, there's a lot of issues. Diversion can take place. This has required the in-hospital pharmacist, the director of pharmacy, to actually spend about 50% of their time just addressing scheduled drugs, whether they're opioids or other scheduled drugs. So this is problematic, and heavy fines are related to improper disposal of these, or even if diversion has been detected at a hospital. Scott brings up somewhat of a controversial number, but one that obviously the Senate and others have been touting, and that is this causal relationship to the first time exposed to an opioid. And the theory is that patients will get these analgesics, injectable opioid analgesics, in the hospital to manage their pain. Their pain is managed adequately. It's not like they don't work. But then when they go home, they get these analgesic gaps, and they're relying on the prescription oral immediate release opioids. And this can lead to a spiraling effect whereby in order to try to get the same type of pain relief that they had in the hospital, they start misusing these medications, and then that could lead to long-term sequelae. So that's some of the data. And quite honestly, you know, even the best experts in this field can't tell you exactly what the contributory epidemiological point prevalence is. But the bottom line is that the opioid epidemic does have an effect in the hospital. It's causing lots of additional healthcare cost burdens to manage these medications, and the additional adverse events related to opioids used in the postoperative setting also add to that burden, economic costs. So there's the potential societal negative effects that I just described, and then there's the actual institutional burdens related to opioids. Besides, occasional sentinel events like people dying from opioid-induced apnea. So these are all real things that are monitored and measured, and we may be able to mitigate that. That's the hope.
All right. Thank you for that. I have two more questions, and I promise I'll shut up.
No problem.
One question is, in the phase 3, you mentioned you're going to compare the product to a placebo. When you go out into the market and you want to sell it, and it's the physician really who's going to order the pain post-surgery for the patient, how are you going to convince them that it's going to be as good as morphine or Toradol boluses or something else if the phase 3 is going to compare it to a placebo?
Well, a couple of things there. First of all, we're benefiting greatly from the fact that Ketorolac, known as Toradol, is already well known, and it's used. Over 45 million doses per year of it are used in this setting already, and it's by far and away the number one dosed non-opioid injectable product for post-surgical pain. So, and one of the reasons it is because it's well known to be the most potent of the NSAIDs, and has been shown to be as potent as morphine. And this is already widely recognized by anesthesiologists in particular, and by hospitals. So we're actually not really having to establish that fact, although certainly the chances that we're going to beat placebo in a post-surgical pain trial are very, very high. We'll also be measuring morphine reduction, if you will, or amount of morphine used for breakthrough pain in our study, and we can tell you more about that if you like. But this dynamic around Ketorolac versus opioids, so you know, it's all Ketorolac in the bolus form, the existing injectable now, is already growing at 18% per year, while the opioid piece is declining, and it's largely because of the recognized potency of the product and the effectiveness of it. You know, so it's not an uphill climb for us at all to convince people of that. It's more about the story around the continuous infusion. What are the advantages vis-a-vis repeated injections of Ketorolac bolus right now? And can we, you know, is there a solid story there that we can, get back to what Joe was saying, you know, potentially not just reduce the amount of opioids that need to be used, but maybe even do a paradigm shift with this, whereby as a continuously infused 24-hour around-the-clock product, could we replace opioids as the underlying therapy and use something else for breakthrough pain? Because right now, what the Ketorolac is used for breakthrough pain most all the time, is an opioid as the underlying therapy. Does that help?
Yes and no, to be honest with you. I agree with
Maybe
you.
Maybe I can help a little bit on it too.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
So this is a 505(b)(2), so it's an expedited regulatory pathway. It allows us to rely on the literature. In over 20 studies with 1,300 exposures to various doses of continuously infused alcohol-based Ketorolac in non-GCP, so that means non-FDA regulated trials, there was the following findings: that Ketorolac consistently beat placebo when infused after a bolus dose at a low-dose infusion. Ketorolac was non-inferior to morphine. So they didn't look at superiority in these trials, but it showed non-inferiority, decreased opioid consumption, decreased opioid side effects. Ketorolac, even at bolus doses of 5 milligrams, which would be 1/6 the maximum single dose, has shown to be better than placebo. So we're very confident based on that information and based on the PK modeling by Carl Peck, one of the foremost PK modelers in the world, that we should be able to achieve the same type of success. This, I think, is reflected in the FDA's decision to only have us do one pivotal trial. We chose a bunionectomy because it's a validated model by the FDA. It de-risks the regulatory approval process, and we should see very consistent studies with the historical performance as quoted in those 20 studies in 1,300 patients. Now, we also picked an open-label safety and effectiveness trial so that there'd be a larger breadth of clinical experience before approval of this drug in other types of painful procedures with other types of pain trajectories associated with them. So that is the idea of adding that additional 500 patients, not just for safety, but also to broaden the breadth and clinical exposure and have in the label in the clinical trial section. So we're pretty confident that we'll match the historical data. If anything, we think we'll even be able to do better related to any tolerability issues with infusing alcohol because we're a saline-based formulation. And we have gotten good guidance from the FDA that the clinical development protocol that we have, if we meet these objectives, should result in a positive outcome. Did that answer your question?
Yes and no again.
Okay.
You know what?
Sorry
to interject.
What specifically can I answer? Go ahead.
Well, from an FDA perspective, I totally get it. I mean, comparing it to placebo, I can tell you from now, you're going to have good results and you're going to show, obviously, a benefit compared to placebo. And I wouldn't do it any other way, to prove to the FDA that, I want to bring this product to the market. My concern is you're going to get your FDA approval, you're going to go to market, and you're going to tell the hospitals and the physicians that, hey, use this product as an infusion versus giving 3 or 4 boluses a day, or versus, giving an opioid drug for 24 hours. where you have no data to show that it's better? What if someone plays a
Right.
devil's
So
advocate and tells you, what if the infusion is inferior to boluses?
right.
May I interject? You guys, this is John. I'm an anesthesiologist, and I actually practice and use these drugs all the time. And I have a perspective to offer, if you don't mind.
Please do. Yeah.
So in terms of giving the drugs, I don't think there's going to be any doubt that it is going to be better than placebo. And I don't think there's going to be any doubt in terms of people wanting to use this. And it's not this opioid crisis. It's a great thing to push this through in terms of FDA because there's all of this awareness. But inside the hospital at the current point, no one's telling us, hey, you must reduce the amount of opiates that you use. That said, there's plenty of people who are trying to reduce opiate use for various reasons. And it happens all the time. When we do total joints, we always use non-steroidals along with IV Tylenol, along with a multimodal approach to try to reduce the amount of opiates that you use as a baseline. So in terms of saying, will people use this? Absolutely, people will use this. The concern from the physician's point of view, though, will be this. So what is the safety profile? So unlike IV Tylenol, when you're giving Toradol, one of the things mentioned was GI bleed. The other thing that we need to be aware of is that non-steroidals can cause people with chronic kidney disease to potentially have acute renal failure. And so what would be important to know is whether there's the safety profile in terms of, and I saw kind of the plasma levels and peak levels, but to make sure that isn't going to be derailed by the safety. The second piece is because people use acetaminophen IV all the time, and so it, in terms of safety profile, for the most part, is great, right? So unless somebody has severe liver disease, you're using IV Tylenol all the time. So the part in my mind to prove is why would you use IV Toradol over IV acetaminophen? Do you have a study that compares kind of the efficacy of the two? People have gotten used to acetaminophen, and to switch over, it's got to show that that there's some sort of safety profile and its efficacy.
Yeah.
So Jonathan, I have a question for you there, Jonathan. How many times are you using IV acetaminophen as monotherapy?
It's very rare.
Right, because it's indicated for mild pain, right? So IV acetaminophen in a recent chart review done by Scott and White Baylor Hospital actually showed that you used more opioids when you try to initiate a monotherapy affirmative type of analgesic plan. So it's a bolt-on, right? It's an add-on that costs about $100+ of dose. So when you look at the difference with a low-dose continuous infusion of Ketorolac or Toradol, what we're finding is that you do not use opioids as your rescue. You may be able to actually just use this as your analgesic foundation. And then if you want to add, for multi-mechanistic analgesic reasons, the IV acetaminophen, well, then that's always an option. We call that TNT, Toradol and Tylenol, right? So I think to answer your first question about safety, we can send you a nice meta-analysis done by the group at Yale related to renal issues, related to GI and bleeding. And that'll give you the most up-to-date sort of feel with Ketorolac. But our safety and effectiveness trial is powered to pick up a 0.9% incidence rate, which is what the label currently reads for Ketorolac when it comes to their GI bleeding, with a 95% confidence level. So it's a 90% powered, 95% confidence level to pick up any signal that would relate to GI bleeding. And so we're pretty confident, and when we went through with the FDA our plan related to safety and efficacy, we looked at those. We do not expect to lose the 5 box warnings that are currently on Ketorolac. We're looking at only giving it for 1 day because hospital chart reviews in 115 different institutions showed that people are basically getting out of the hospital because of the ERIS protocols and alike. That's an advanced recovery after surgery for the others. That 80-something percent, 86% of the Ketorolac that's given in multiple doses is given in the first 24 hours. Now, there's a segment of the market, about 12 to 15%, that is getting 5 and 6 doses, right, that exceed the 4 or 120 milligram daily dose. And that's really, I think, in an effort to try to totally avoid opioids. And in the institutions, if they have not initiated an opioid elimination or reduction policy, they will, because that's the newest JCAHO guidelines that were published just about 4 weeks ago. So I think in sum, I think that they're going to move more towards opioid stewardship. That's what the mandate for these guidelines are saying, so that they can actually remove opioids and replace opioids as opposed to supplement in a multi-mechanistic manner. I think by us having a continuous infusion, we eliminate the analgesic gap. We're able to titrate up because we're going to deliver about 96 milligrams. So we still have another 30 to go if we need to bump someone up. Yep. And it really does, and it has shown in the studies that I mentioned to be at the same potency as morphine.
Yeah, and I think just what I would add quickly is that this is the reason the questions regarding the safety profile, that's the biggest thing we talked about with FDA last week, and that's one of the reasons we had proposed this large open label study to accompany the one pivotal trial, in which we're going to include all kinds of different surgeries and also include more at-risk patient groups like elderly and both mild and moderately renally impaired patients, just to track and collect data on all those things. So we will have a pooled safety database on something like 900 patients that'll get at all those things you're talking about.
Okay, so I don't want to interject more. I have questions as well, but I think you had one more question, right?
Yeah, wait, but there was one last question on my notes here. The head-to-head comparison. So we already have planned to have a health economics and outcomes research study done by Rami Ben Joseph, who's one of the most noted pain medicine HEOR specialists, to look at these type of HEOR results to help clinicians and managed care and hospitals get a better idea of what's going on. It's important to realize that Ketorolac right now is on formulary at many hospitals. So when we look at adoption rates, we may be able to get an accelerated P&T review because it is still given parenterally. The only difference is how it's given. So again, we're going to try to leverage all of those processes so that people have more access to this. And if it helps too, we can share the white paper with you guys that reviews those studies that I mentioned.
Okay.
I wanted to give Dr. Manzi an opportunity to chime in if you have a question, Dr. Manzi.
I think you guys answered all my questions. I don't know, you guys don't know me. I'm Suzanne Manzi. I'm in Houston, Texas, actively practicing pain management. I'm PM&R by training, but I do a lot of inpatient hospital consults when called for post-surgical pain. And, you know, I use Tortal all the time, especially after some of my procedures. My patients are usually outpatient and go home the same day, but seeing the patients in the hospital and dealing with the, quote, opioid crisis every single day during my waking hours, you know, I think this is a good opportunity because, as it was brought up earlier, the pain management in the hospital does create problems. And surgeons send the patients home with, you know, however many pain pills. Now they won't even, here in Houston, they won't even order their prescription pads, so they call me to come write their prescriptions if they need anything. But we have to be very, very much educated about what's going on, and this is definitely a good opportunity to break that cycle and hopefully allow the hospitals a different way of treating the patients, but with a way of managing their pain, because that's always the scare. You see these emergency rooms now that they're not even giving any narcotics at all, which, is a good thing. But at the same time, people are very skeptical because they want their pain controlled, obviously, but, are they going to be able to find a drug that can do that? And, the Ketorolac and the Toradol have done that in the past, and they've shown proven efficacy. And I think being able to do it for a 24-hour period is going to make patients much happier in the hospital. And if you do need a rescue dose, you get a rescue dose of an opioid, but at least you have two different mechanisms in action.
Yeah, exactly right. And just, I think I should mention, I know we're getting toward the end of the hour here, but just to kind of talk about time and events a little bit, just so everybody is clear. And this is all on the deck that we have supplied or will supply. But we just, the major milestone was the meeting with FDA last week. And as we said, the major thing that came out of that is that there will not be a requirement for a big outcome study to look at safety aspects. So again, back to that part. FDA is going to accept, our approach to that, which is, as we described, the one pivotal study on the bunionectomy for efficacy, and then the accompanying open label study. So the way this will all roll out is we will now do a formal PK study to look at this dosage, this formulation, and there's going to be a number of cohorts, 4 different cohorts, including some of these at-risk populations that I mentioned. This will run pretty quickly. We'll start that late in June, and we should get top-line data beginning in early August on this. It'll be available pretty quickly. FDA has asked to review that with us, so the output of the PK study, before we progress into the formal phase 3 study. So that'll be sometime this fall to meet with them. And that'll put us in a position to start the 2 phase 3 studies, both the pivotal as well as the open label safety study, January timeframe, early first quarter. And as I said before, you can expect the readout on the bunionectomy study to be sometime third quarter 2019. So that's when we'll see the pivotal data coming out. And that'll be the next big milestone for us because, that is most likely going to be the opportunity for an IPO to raise, additional funding, significant funding at a significantly increased valuation, which could then lead to the commercialization of the product. I will also say, and I think I mentioned this before, we've got some pretty good interest already in the part of strategics on this. So, there could be an exit opportunity in that time frame as well. Again, once we get the readout on the pivotal. So that's kind of how it'll all track. And, again, approval and launch of this as soon as mid-year 2020.
Scott, this is Dan Parsley. So in the end, we want to make sure we understand the investment opportunity here, and you touched on that. For these and for investors coming in this round, if all things pans out the way you described, either an IPO or a strategic exit, can you give us some kind of range of expectations on the potential outcome, financial outcome?
Yeah. Let me ask Dexter to comment on that.
So just in terms of capital markets and exit strategy in this, the $10 million that we're raising now will be at a $23 million pre-money, so a $33 million post-money valuation. That will fund the PK bioavailability study. We're looking to raise $40 million this fall. We're already working with investors and underwriters to line that up. That will be mostly what we call, quote, crossover funds. Those are hedge funds that are interested in investing in companies prior to an IPO. That $40 million will carry the company all the way through to approval, but there will likely be an exit opportunity prior to that. So the $40 million, we're thinking potentially at a $60 to $70 million pre-money valuation, and then an IPO upon the efficacy and safety data and the third quarter could be somewhere in the range of $250 million pre to $300 million pre. Now, and that's for commercial launch. Now, one thing that we do in the industry to benchmark other opportunities is use comparable companies. There is a notable comparable company in this scenario that I think fits nicely with the Neumentum story. There's a company called Cadence Pharmaceuticals, that developed a reformulation of acetaminophen or Tylenol for postoperative pain. The drug that they developed is called Ofirmev, and it's been touched on briefly throughout our talk today. The company Cadence Pharmaceuticals was sold in 2014 for $1.3 billion for this product. Now, again, this is acetaminophen. This accounts for about 4% of the postoperative injectable analgesic market. So we think that provides a really great analog to what the Neumentum story is doing. Now, Neumentum has several things going for it in that they're using Ketorolac, which is much more potent than acetaminophen. The market is much larger for postoperative injectables. It's about 18% of that market and growing, as Scott mentioned, 18% year over year. And as Joe alluded to, it can actually be used as a monotherapy in certain cases, unlike acetaminophen, which is indicated for mild pain. So, without giving specific numbers, the potential is certainly very high.
Dexter, this is Charlie Emily. Most of my colleagues know I'm the managing partner of the direct investment Catalyst Fund. And all of this discussion has been extraordinarily helpful to me in considering the one thing that, Dexter, I think you were in my earlier conversation, I want to be clear on at this point, because I'm not a syndicate leader and we do not invest in AngelMD syndicates. We may invest in the same companies. That's the reason I'm on the phone, basically, as a courtesy and support for Fred Duffy, my colleague. What is the investment vehicle that we're being asked to invest in?
This is a convertible preferred stock. Convertible preferred stock. So the syndicate would be investing in the convertible preferred stock, the Series A, that converts upon an IPO into common or upon exit, an acquisition. So through the Catalyst Fund, you would be buying into the convertible preferred security, which has preference in the capital structure, and that is exactly what the syndicate is buying as well.
Okay.
And that would be convertible to the Series B round in the fall.
No. It's not a convertible note. So it is priced. It is priced at $1.1777. So it's just a matter of, it's not common stock. It just gives the investors preference in the capital structure, so that you guys would have seniority in the event of liquidation. It's just it's sort of it's a very common, very standard structure for equity in a private biotech company.
Got it. Very good. We're running up to an hour on the call here. Are there any last questions?
Yeah, this is John again. May I ask one final question in terms of kind of the model? And so I think it was Dexter who mentioned the comparable to the IV Tylenol.
Yes.
In terms of looking at this and comparing, have you already made assumptions about kind of the pricing of the drug and kind of what the revenues are going to look like in order to to value the company? And if you have something like that, is it something that you can share with us?
Yeah, and this is Scott. There's again in the deck that we provided, there's lots of information on that, and we can share more in our by virtue of our data room. But basically, we're going to price this at $90 a day, somewhere in that range. That's based on the very extensive marketing research we did, and we've gotten great feedback from hospital pharmacists on this. Anything under $100 a day is not something they would look at cause for concern. Ofirmev, just so you know, is priced at about $150 a day. so well over that. There's a product called Exparel, which is up over $300 a day. That is not a direct competitor, but it's in the space. And then if you look at the generic, the bolus injections, kind of depends on which one, but anywhere between $8 to $10 an injection. So if you figure, 4 or more per day, that's $40, $50 and so on. So, our strategy on that one is more of a volume play and less than a really, premium price play. And that's what's been well accepted by the hospital pharmacists we've talked to. And even at that, we get upwards of a $700 million peak year net sales revenue number, but without considering much of a share take from opioids, and if we really end up flipping the paradigm here and becoming, more the foundational therapy as opposed to opioids, there's a big upside number on that, over and above that. So that's what we're thinking, and that's all documented in the deck.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Terrific.
Guys, I think it's been terrific.
Well, let me thank everybody for joining us today. I wanted to just recap next steps.